Defeating California's top mechanics, the cursed and dead 40-year-old Harley-Davidson FXR seemed completely beyond saving. Grown men cowered in fear when a notorious Hells Angels enforcer showed up demanding the bike be repaired. Yet, breaking the tense silence, a scrawny, ragged 8-year-old boy emerged from the shadows of the garage and simply said, "I'll fix it." The midday sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt of Oakland, California. The heat waves radiating off the pavement made the approaching pack of motorcycles look like phantoms rising from the earth, but the deep, guttural roar of unbaffled V-twin engines confirmed they were very real. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the local chapter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club was descending upon Apex Iron Works, the most reputable custom motorcycle garage in the Bay Area. At the helm of the pack was Jim Mercer, a mountain of a man with a beard the color of steel wool. Jim was a veteran enforcer for the club. His leather cut was weathered, adorned with the infamous Death's Head patch and the filthy few insignia, signifying decades of unwavering loyalty and a life lived entirely on his own terms. But today, Jim wasn't looking for a fight. He was looking for a miracle. Behind Jim, strapped securely to the bed of a heavy-duty flatbed truck, was the reason for this menacing procession. It was a 1986 Harley-Davidson FXR. To the untrained eye, it was just an old, beat-up motorcycle with chipped black paint and rusted chrome. But to the men wearing the winged Death's Head, this machine was a holy relic. It had belonged to Dutch Sullivan, a legendary former chapter president who had tragically passed away 3 months prior. The club was organizing a massive memorial run, a 1,000-bike procession down the California coast to honor Dutch, and tradition dictated that Dutch's bike had to lead the pack. There was only one problem. The FXR was dead, and not just mechanically broken, but seemingly cursed. The caravan pulled into the lot of Apex Iron Works. The heavy bay doors were already rolled up, and the shop's head mechanic and owner, a man known simply as Rusty, stood wiping his greasy hands on a shop rag. Rusty was a master of his craft, a man who had built custom choppers for celebrities and outlaws alike. If an engine required air, fuel, and spark, Rusty could make it roar. But as Jim Mercer killed his engine and stepped off his bike, Rusty's face was pale. "Tell me she's breathing, Rusty," Jim said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that barely carried over the pinging of cooling exhaust pipes. Rusty swallowed hard, tossing the dirty red rag onto a nearby workbench. He looked at the flatbed, then back at Jim. "Jim, I'm going to shoot you straight because I respect this club. I've had 3 of my best guys on that FXR for 2 weeks. We've rebuilt the carburetor. We swapped the entire ignition system, ripped out the old wiring harness, and replaced the stator, the rotor, and the coil. We even tore down the top end to check the compression. It's perfect. Mathematically, scientifically, that engine should start." "I don't want a science lesson," Jim interrupted, taking a step forward. The half-dozen bikers behind him mirrored his movement, crossing their heavily tattooed arms. "I want to hear Dutch's bike turn over." "It won't," Rusty admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "Every time we hit the starter, it cranks, but it won't catch. And if we try to kick-start it, it kicks back so hard, it nearly shattered my apprentice's shin. And the electrical drain. Jim, it makes no sense. You put a brand new battery in it, and within 10 minutes, something sucks it bone dry. There's a short somewhere deep in the case that we can't find. I'm sorry. We gave up. You need an exorcist, not a mechanic." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the garage. The air smelled thick of gasoline, sweat, and impending violence. Jim stepped into the garage, his heavy boots echoing against the concrete floor. He walked over to the FXR, resting his massive, scarred hand on the leather seat that still bore the imprint of his deceased brother. "Dutch built this club," Jim whispered, though in the dead silence of the shop, every man heard it. "He pulled me out of the gutter in '94. This bike leads the memorial run this Saturday. If it doesn't, it's a sign of disrespect to his legacy." Jim slowly turned around to face Rusty. The sorrow in his eyes had hardened into something cold and dangerous. "I paid you $5,000 up front, Rusty. I trusted you. If you're telling me that the great Apex Iron Works is giving up on a 40-year-old piece of American steel, then maybe this shop doesn't deserve to keep its doors open." Rusty took a step back, raising his hands defensively. "Jim, please. We tried everything. It's a dead machine. I'll give you until Friday," Jim said, his voice devoid of emotion. If I come back here and that engine doesn't fire, I'm taking my bike. And then, I'm taking my 5 grand back. One way or another. The threat hung in the air, absolute and terrifying. Rusty knew exactly what one way or another meant. He had a wife, a mortgage, and a business he had bled for. He looked at the motorcycle, a dark monolith of iron and frustration, and felt entirely helpless. You're checking the wrong timing marks. The voice was small, barely louder than a whisper, but it cut through the heavy tension of the garage like a razor blade. Jim Mercer snapped his head around. Rusty blinked in shock. The Hells Angels turned in unison, their hands instinctively dropping toward their belts. Standing in the shadowy corner of the garage, holding a push broom that was easily twice his height, was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old. He was painfully thin, wearing a faded, oversized t-shirt that hung off his bony shoulders, and a pair of jeans patched at the knees. His face was smudged with engine grease, but his bright blue eyes stared unblinkingly at the massive enforcer of the Hells Angels. This was Leo. "Leo, shut your mouth and get back to sweeping," Rusty barked, his panic spiking. The last thing he needed was a smart-mouthed street kid provoking a violent motorcycle club. Leo didn't flinch. He gripped the wooden handle of the broom tighter and took a step out of the shadows, right into the center of the standoff. Jim Mercer stared down at the scrawny child. For a moment, the sheer absurdity of the situation baffled him. "Who the hell is this kid?" Jim demanded, looking at Rusty. "He's nobody," Rusty said quickly, rushing forward to grab Leo's arm. "His dad used to rent a bay in the back before he passed away. Kid's mom is working 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads, so I let him sweep up the shop for a few bucks and a hot meal. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Come on, Leo, get in the back." Leo yanked his arm out of Rusty's grasp with surprising strength. He didn't look at the mechanic. He kept his eyes locked on Jim. "I know what I'm talking about," Leo said, his voice surprisingly steady for a child facing down a man who had spent time in federal prison. "Mr. Rusty and his guys, they're plugging the bike into computers. They're reading manuals for a 1986 Evolution motor. But that bike ain't standard." One of the younger angels, a prospect named Bobby, laughed outright. "Listen to the rugrat. Kid, go play with your Hot Wheels. Grown men are talking." Jim raised a single massive hand, silencing Bobby instantly. Jim's eyes narrowed as he looked from the boy to the bike, and then back to the boy. "What did you just say, kid?" Leo pointed a grimy finger at the heavy timing cover on the right side of the engine. "They timed the ignition based on the factory marks for an Evo motor, but that's a trap. My dad told me about this bike. He said Mr. Dutch was a madman when it came to engines." Jim's breath hitched slightly at the mention of his friend. "Go on." "My dad said Mr. Dutch blew the bottom end of this motor during a race in Reno back in '92. Leo explained, stepping closer to the machine. He reached out and traced his small fingers over the brushed aluminum of the cam cover. He didn't have money for new factory parts, so he gutted a wrecked 1978 shovelhead and machined the cam gear to fit this case. The timing marks on the flywheels are off by exactly 12 degrees. If you try to fire it on the factory mark, the spark plug detonates while the intake valve is still open. That's why it kicks back and tries to break your leg." The garage was dead silent. Rusty stood frozen, his jaw slightly open. The mechanics in the back, who had been eavesdropping, slowly stepped out from behind their toolboxes. "And the battery drain?" Jim asked, his voice suddenly very quiet, devoid of the earlier aggression. "It's not a short," Leo said simply. "It's a kill switch. Mr. Dutch was paranoid about people stealing his bike. He wired a secondary ignition bypass directly into the frame under the gas tank. If you don't toggle a hidden switch beneath the left side fat bob tank before you turn the key, the circuit stays open, grounding the battery to the frame. It bleeds a brand new battery dry in 10 minutes flat." Jim Mercer stared at the boy. He remembered 1992. He remembered Reno. He remembered Dutch laughing like a maniac in a motel parking lot, covered in oil, bragging about a Frankenstein engine he was building from scratch. "What was your dad's name, kid?" Jim asked softly. "Arthur," Leo replied, his gaze dropping to the floor for the first time. "Arthur Hayes." Jim let out a slow, heavy exhale, removing his sunglasses. "Artie Hayes," he muttered to himself. He turned to the other angels. Artie Hayes was the only wrench Dutch ever trusted outside the club. Guy was a wizard. Died of lung cancer 2 years ago. Jim turned back to Rusty. Rusty, did you check for a shovelhead cam gear? Rusty swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. Jim, you can't be serious. You can't just mix shovel and Evo bottom end parts like that. The tolerances are entirely different. It's a mechanical nightmare. Did you check it? Jim roared, the sound echoing off the metal roof. No, Rusty admitted quietly. We went by the book. Jim looked back down at the 8-year-old boy. The kid was dirty, underfed, and wearing shoes with holes in the toes. Yet, in his bright eyes, Jim saw the same spark of mechanical genius that his father used to possess. You think you can fix it, kid? Jim asked. Rusty stepped forward, frantic. Jim, be reasonable. He's 8 years old. He doesn't have the physical strength to torque down a cylinder head, let alone retime a custom V-twin. If he messes up the valves, the piston will smash into them and turn that engine into a metal grenade. I asked the boy. Jim said coldly, not taking his eyes off Leo. Leo looked up. I can't lift the heavy wrenches, sir. Mr. Rusty is right about that. But if I tell them exactly what to do, if I guide their hands, I can make it run. Jim slowly nodded. He turned to Rusty, pointing a thick finger at the shop owner's chest. You hear that, Rusty? The boy is your new shop foreman. You and your mechanics are his hands. You do exactly what he tells you. Every bolt, every wire, every timing degree. Rusty looked horrified. Jim, if this kid destroys Dutch's motor, if he destroys it, it's on him and it's on me. Jim interrupted. But if I come back here tomorrow at noon, and this bike isn't roaring, I am shutting this garage down permanently. Jim reached into his leather vest, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and shoved it into Leo's tiny, greasy hand. Go buy yourself a steak, kid. You're going to need your energy. You start on the Widowmaker tomorrow at dawn. As the Hells Angels fired up their bikes and roared out of the lot, leaving behind a cloud of exhaust and tire smoke, Leo stood holding the $100 bill. He looked at the cursed 1986 FXR. He could almost feel his father's hand on his shoulder. The real work was about to begin. The sun had barely begun to bleed over the industrial skyline of Oakland when Leo walked through the side door of Apex Iron Works on Wednesday morning. He looked different today. His face was scrubbed clean, and though his clothes were still worn and oversized, he carried himself with a quiet, undeniable purpose. He had eaten the steak Jim Mercer had paid for, the best meal he and his mother had shared in months, and he was ready to earn it. Rusty and his top 3 mechanics, Big Dave, a heavily tattooed giant, Tommy, a wiry speed freak who specialized in carburetors, and Old Man Pete, the shop's electrical guru, were already standing around the black 1986 FXR. They looked exhausted and deeply skeptical. All right, kid, Rusty said, crossing his arms. He looked more stressed than a man defusing a bomb. Jim Mercer practically signed my death warrant if this doesn't work. We are yours to command. Where do we start? Leo didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the right side of the motorcycle. Take off the cam cover, Mr. Dave, and drain the oil first, unless you want it all over your boots. Big Dave grunted, sliding a drain pan under the bike. For the next 3 hours, a bizarre ballet unfolded in the garage. Grown men, seasoned veterans of the wrench, followed the precise, whispered instructions of an 8-year-old boy. When the cam cover was finally pulled, exposing the complex array of gears inside the engine, Leo climbed onto a milk crate to get a better look. He produced a small, battered flashlight from his pocket and shined it onto the flywheel. There, Leo pointed a tiny, grease-stained finger. Look at the pinion gear. See the timing mark? Rusty leaned in, squinting under the harsh drop light. His eyes widened. I'll be damned. It's not an Evo mark. It's stamped with AV. That's a shovel head gear. You were right, Leo. Mr. Dutch was a genius, but he was cheap, Leo said matter-of-factly. He mated the shovel gear to the Evo cam. You have to advance the timing by exactly 12 degrees from the factory service manual, or the spark hits a wall of uncompressed gas. That's what was kicking back and bending your pushrods. The pushrods? Tommy suddenly gasped, his face draining of color. He scrambled to a nearby workbench, where the engine's internal rods were laid out on a shop towel. He rolled one across the flat steel of the bench. It wobbled violently. Rusty, they're bent. A cold sweat broke out on Rusty's forehead. Are you kidding me? This is a hybrid motor. Standard evolution pushrods won't fit the geometry of that modified cam, and shovelhead rods are too short. Dutch must have custom machined these himself. We can't just order these from a catalog. The mechanics fell silent. The reality of the situation crashed down upon them. They had found the problem, but without the custom parts to reassemble the valve train, the engine was just as dead as it had been yesterday. It was Wednesday afternoon. They had less than 48 hours. "We're done," Big Dave muttered, throwing a heavy wrench onto the concrete floor with a deafening clang. "Jim is going to burn this shop to the ground." Leo climbed down from his milk crate. He didn't look panicked. He walked over to the workbench, picked up one of the bent steel rods, and examined it. "My dad was Mr. Dutch's mechanic," Leo said quietly. "Mr. Dutch broke things all the time. He rode too hard. My dad knew this." Leo looked up at Rusty. "Does Apex Iron Works still have the basement storage lockers? The ones from before you bought the building?" Rusty blinked, confused by the sudden change in subject. "Yeah, down below the paint booth. It's just damp and full of junk." "What?" "Locker 42, Leo said. "My dad rented it. When he got sick, when the cancer got bad, we couldn't pay the rent anymore. The old landlord locked it up, but my dad told me he never threw away his custom cuts. He said if you build a Frankenstein monster, you better keep spare body parts." 10 minutes later, Rusty, armed with heavy bolt cutters, snapped the rusted padlock off Locker 42 in the damp, dimly lit basement. The heavy metal door squealed open. Inside, covered in a thick layer of dust and spider webs, were cardboard boxes filled with old motorcycle magazines, rusted tools, and a heavy wooden crate locked with a simple brass latch. Leo knelt in the dust and flipped the latch. Inside the crate, wrapped meticulously in oiled canvas rags, were neatly organized engine components. Leo peeled back a layer of canvas, revealing a set of 4 pristine custom-machined pushrods. Attached to them was a faded piece of masking tape with the words, "Dutch's Widowmaker Spares," written in faded black Sharpie. Rusty stared at the boy, a mixture of awe and absolute disbelief washing over him. "Your old man," Rusty whispered, "was a saint." "He was a mechanic," Leo corrected gently. "Let's go fix the bike." Thursday was consumed by the electrical system. Following Leo's directions, Pete, the electrical guru, traced the phantom battery drain. It was exactly where Leo said it would be. A secondary heavy-gauge wire spliced invisibly into the ignition harness, running up the backbone of the frame and terminating at a tiny, almost imperceptible toggle switch recessed into the underside of the left side fuel tank. If the switch was open, the starter would crank, but the ignition coil was completely grounded out to the frame, bleeding the battery dry without ever delivering a spark. By Thursday night at 11 p.m., the engine was fully reassembled. The custom pushrods were installed, the valves were adjusted, the timing was locked in at a 12-degree advance, and the battery was fully charged. "Should we fire it up?" Big Dave asked, his hand hovering over the ignition key. "No," Leo said from his spot on the milk crate. He looked exhausted, bags under his bright blue eyes, his hands stained permanently black with grease. "Mr. Mercer paid to hear it turn over. If we start it now and something breaks, we don't have time to fix it. We wait." Friday morning arrived with an agonizing slowness. The air in the garage was thick with anticipation. The 1986 FXR sat in the center of the bay, wiped down and polished, looking like a dark predator waiting to be unchained. At exactly 11:45 a.m., the ground began to vibrate. It started as a low rumble in the distance, growing steadily louder until it became a deafening mechanical thunder. The Hells Angels had returned. This time it wasn't just a half-dozen riders. A pack of 20 bikers rolled into the lot, forming a massive wall of leather, chrome, and intimidation. Jim Mercer killed his engine and kicked his kickstand down. He stepped off his bike, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He walked into the garage, his heavy boots echoing in the quiet shop. The rest of the club filed in behind him, crossing their arms. Their eyes locked on the black FXR. Rusty stood near the toolbox, sweating profusely despite the cool morning air. Big Dave, Tommy, and Pete stood behind him, looking like men facing a firing squad. Only Leo stood near the bike, holding his large push broom, looking up at the towering enforcer. "Friday, noon," Jim Mercer said, his deep voice cutting through the tension. He looked at Rusty. "Is it a motorcycle, or is it scrap metal?" Rusty swallowed hard, his throat dry. He took a step back and gestured toward the 8-year-old boy. "It's all on the kid, Jim. We did exactly what he told us to do. Jim slowly turned his gaze to Leo. The massive biker walked over to the FXR. He ran his hand over the leather seat, then gripped the heavy handlebars. He swung his muscular leg over the bike, settling his weight into the saddle. He turned the ignition key. The headlight flickered to life. Jim looked down at Leo. Moment of truth, kid. Jim gripped the clutch, took a breath, and hit the starter button. Click. Whir. Whir. The starter motor spun cleanly, but the engine didn't catch. There was no spark, no combustion, just the hollow, depressing sound of a dead machine turning over. Rusty's heart plummeted into his stomach. Big Dave closed his eyes. The bikers behind Jim shifted their weight, a dangerous murmur rippling through the crowd. Jim took his thumb off the starter. He didn't look angry. He looked profoundly disappointed. He slowly shook his head. "You forgot," Leo said. The small voice silenced the entire room. Jim looked down at the boy, his brow furrowed. "Forgot what?" Leo took a step closer, pointing his small, greasy finger at the left side of the gas tank. "You forgot Mr. Dutch's trick, Mr. Mercer. Under the left fat bob, the switch." Jim froze. A look of sudden realization washed over his weathered face. He reached his massive left hand under the curve of the fuel tank. His thick fingers blindly searched the dark recess of the metal. Suddenly, he felt it, a tiny metal toggle switch, completely hidden from view. Click. Jim pulled his hand back. He looked at Leo, then gripped the handlebars again. He pressed the starter button. Catch. Rumble. Roar. The engine erupted with a terrifying, violent explosion of sound. It didn't just start, it detonated into life. The straight pipes unleashed a deafening rhythmic thunder that shook the dust from the rafters and rattled the tools in their metal chests. It was the distinct, uneven, heavy-hitting idle of a heavily modified high-compression V-twin. It sounded like an angry beast that had finally been let off its leash. Jim Mercer twisted the throttle. The engine roared, a wall of pure mechanical aggression that forced Rusty and the mechanics to cover their ears. Fire spat from the exhaust pipes. The sound was absolutely perfect. Jim let the bike settle back into its heavy, thumping idle. He sat there for a long moment, feeling the intense vibration of the engine beneath him. Tears, thick and unexpected, welled up in the corners of the old enforcer's eyes. It was the exact sound of his deceased best friend. It was the sound of 1992. It was the sound of Brotherhood. He reached down and hit the kill switch. The garage descended into a ringing, stunned silence. Jim slowly stepped off the bike. He walked over to Rusty, reached into his leather vest, and pulled out a thick envelope. He slapped it hard against Rusty's chest. "That's the $5,000 I owe you," Jim said, his voice thick with emotion. "And an extra $2 for the rush job." Rusty took the envelope with shaking hands. "Jim, I didn't do it. I just turned the wrenches. It was all him." Jim turned to Leo. The boy was leaning against his broom, a small, tired smile on his face. Jim knelt down on one knee, ignoring the grease on the floor, bringing himself to eye level with the 8-year-old. "Your daddy, Artie," Jim said softly, "was the finest mechanic I ever knew. I thought when he died, his magic died with him. I was wrong." Jim reached up and unclasped a heavy silver chain from his neck. Hanging from it was a small, solid silver-winged skull, a medallion given only to the closest, most trusted friends of the club. He looped it around Leo's neck. The heavy silver rested against the boy's oversized t-shirt. "You wear this," Jim told the boy, his voice carrying the absolute weight of a promise. "Anyone in this city gives you or your mother trouble, you show them that. You tell them you're under the protection of the Oakland chapter." Leo looked down at the medallion, his eyes wide. "Thank you, sir." Jim stood up, towering over the boy once again. He looked at Rusty. "Rusty, the boy works for you now. An official apprenticeship. You pay him a real wage, and you teach him how to use his hands so he can match what's in his head. And when he's 18, the club is paying his tuition for engineering school. Do we have an understanding?" Rusty nodded vigorously. "Yes, Jim, absolutely. We'd be honored to have him." Jim Mercer turned back to the black FXR. He smiled, a genuine, warm expression that completely transformed his intimidating face. "All right, brothers," he yelled to the pack. "Let's load her up. Dutch has a ride to lead tomorrow." As the bikers cheered and began maneuvering the flatbed truck, Leo stood near the workbench, his fingers tracing the outline of the silver skull on his chest. Big Dave walked by, pausing to gently ruffle the boy's hair with a massive, calloused hand. The ghost of Apex Iron Works had been exorcised, not by a team of master mechanics with computers, but by an 8-year-old boy armed with nothing but his father's memory and grease on his hands. What an incredible story of heart, grit, and believing in the underdog. If Leo's courage and mechanical genius inspired you, please hit that like button and share this story with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing real-life dramas and hit the notification bell so you never miss a twist. See you in the next video.